We're at the University of North Florida talking with Dr. Aaron Sheehan Dean about his book, Why Confederates Fought, Family and Nation in Civil War. Dr. Sheehan Dean, your book explores Virginia soldiers and their family in the Civil War. Why did you choose to concentrate on Virginia as opposed to other Confederate states?
Well, because Virginia is really the most important theater of the war, and what I was looking at was trying to assess questions of loyalty. And so Virginia soldiers are usually fighting in a national army close to their homes but not at them, and so they're subject to the pressure of wanting to be home and wanting to defend their state as well, and I wanted to see how those variables all sort of played out.
Right. What types of stories emerged when you were writing the book?
Well, the big story that emerged was a sort of surprising one. The traditional telling is that over the course of the war, Confederates sort of slowly give up, particularly poor and middle-class men, and I found, in fact, that they tended to stay in, and looking at the way in which they talked to their families about why they were staying in is really what became the main part of the book, the main argument.
Why did you find they were fighting in the first place?
Well, there's certainly a strong enthusiasm built on a sense of sort of betrayal by the part of the North. Virginia is a sort of unique state as a part of the Upper South. Virginia conservatives had really put a lot behind Lincoln, sort of went out on a limb extending themselves as saying Lincoln's no threat to us, and then after the secession of the Lower South, and particularly after Fort Sumter, Lincoln calls up troops, and Virginians, the Unionists there, really see that as a betrayal. There's a strong sort of outpouring of martial enthusiasm, and that's what gets them in. My concern was really sort of why do they stay in, and so the question is Confederate persistence.
I mean, in addition to taking a look at more of the going into some of the diaries and other things, you take a quantitative look at who fought. What types of things did you come up with there?
Well, the first thing is that the sort of standard argument is that the Civil War is a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. It's really a rich man's fight. Rich counties overwhelmingly sent high numbers of men, so in terms of correlation, you get a very strong correlation between wealth and slaveholding and enlistment. The more wealth a county has, the more slaves a place has, the more men go to fight. So rich men are actually overrepresented in the army as opposed to underrepresented. The other statistical element that emerged that was important, which is desertion. And I found overall a 15% rate of desertion in Confederate forces, 10% because some of those go back. But the important thing is that the desertion actually peaks in '62. The traditional argument is that it peaks late in the war. It steadily goes up. And in fact, what I find is that desertion peaks in '62 because men are angry about the Draft Act, and then it goes down and sort of levels off after that and isn't subject to this sort of continual escalation over the course of the war.
Was there a difference in how the soldiers viewed the war as opposed to the people on the home front, their families?
Yeah, I think there is not initially. By 1864, those views start to diverge. But what's important about the Civil War is that it's an all-volunteer army, and particularly in Virginia, those soldiers are never very far away from their homes. They're in constant contact with their families, so they're as much a part of their home communities as they are part of new communities in the army. I think by '64, and particularly the trench warfare around Petersburg, which lasts for 10 months, you start to get this strong divergence where soldiers have become quite hardened, and hardened, in fact, to Confederate civilian suffering, and they're viewing things very differently than civilians are, but that's late in the war.
How did you conduct most of your research for the book, and how did you compile it into a book?
Well, a lot of it was traveling to archives around Virginia and the South, reading diaries and letters. That's the sort of main qualitative evidence, is diaries and letters, newspapers as well, and then a lot of statistical work drawing on a great regimental history series that's produced in the state of Virginia that has compiled out of the National Archives all the service records of Virginia soldiers. And so I created a statistically valid sample using those books and drawing soldiers out, and then going back to the U.S. Census and trying to get demographic information about soldiers, their rank in the household, their amount of wealth, slaveholding, and then ran statistical assessments of them and sort of tried to bring those two bodies, one quantitative and one qualitative, together to make a clear story.
Why did you decide to write the book in the first place?
I was interested in the question of sort of why we fight wars and then how we explain those. And that, for me, has emerged as the most important element, is that Confederates, for a long time, particularly for lower and non-slaveholding Confederates, lower-class non-slaveholding Confederates, the argument has been that it's a somewhat irrational war. It doesn't make sense for them to fight. And my argument, what I tell my students, is we have to give historical actors the same credit we would give ourselves. We rationalize is the bad way to put it, I think, but we explain things to ourselves in ways that make sense. and they did the same thing. And so it was trying to figure out why they start and then how they understand it over time, because we continue to fight wars, we continue to offer explanations that make sense to us and then historically become quite baffling. And I wanted to catch that sort of dynamism and that change over time.
Great. We've been talking with Dr. Aaron Sheehan Dean about his book, Why Confederates Fought, Family and Nation in Civil War.
Thank you.
Did you know you can view Book TV programs online? Go to booktv.org. Type the name of the author, book, or subject into the search area in the upper left-hand corner of the page. Select the Watch link. Now you can view the entire program. You might also explore the Recently on Book TV box or the Featured Programs box to find and view recent and featured programs.